Which ideal and or practice are you most attracted to in Free Methodism? Or boil it down, what do you like most about Free Methodist Church?
Well, when I first came to Seattle Pacific, I encountered a ministry, an educational ministry, and it was part of the Free Methodist Church. And I didn't have any real background in even knowing what a Free Methodist was or what a Free Methodist institution was. And then I became aware that for a very small denomination, Free Methodists have started a lot of schools and spent a lot of attention on the question of an educated ministry. Maybe when I was younger, I had the thought that if you had a lot of education, it would be harder for you to be spiritual or harder for you to trust God. In fact, some of the people I knew would say if you're too educated, then you think you can do it in your own strength rather than relying on God. And I found in the Free Methodist Church a nice marriage between the idea that a person who studied and pondered difficult questions and came up with more sophisticated answers did not necessarily need to be cold-hearted. There was a beautiful blend. And when I attended my first service at the First Free Methodist Church, at the time I was chairman of Ballard Baptist Church. They were in a time of transition. I visited. I found an order of service and a spirit that I enjoyed. I enjoyed especially the quality of the music and the preaching, which was thoughtful and not just from the hip. And so I came away with a very favorable impression, and ultimately then became a member of the Pacific Northwest Conference of the Free Methodist Church. Basically, it's a thoughtful blending of spirit and study that made me pleased with my decision.
As the denomination moves into the next 25 to 30 years, do you have any concerns or fears that you would like young pastors to be aware of?
Well, a lot has changed. Old people are supposed to be wise, and they sometimes are no more wise, but you gain a perspective of years, what things that have changed that are different than what they used to be. And what I've observed from being in quite a few churches and just looking is what I would say is a decline in worship. Most of the churches that I attend now, from time to time, appear to me to be, whether they're contemporary or traditional, more me-centered instead of God-centered. And there's a casualness about the service that at times almost betrays the feeling of my buddy in the sky, God. And when I took a speech class at Seattle Pacific years ago, I had Dr. Ken Miles, and he said, if I teach you nothing else during the course of this class, I hope that you will learn how to say the word God. It's not God, it's God. There has to be some understanding on your part of what you're saying when you say God. He is worthy of our worship. He's not an equal. So I hope the sense of worship, which people trying to build bridges to a community and to non-attenders, sometimes gets wrapped up in casual dress and casual music, doesn't spill over to a sense of bringing God down to our size. He's not our size. And it's important in the young people that are in the church, the children, to realize that God is wholly other, and that we approach Him with a certain sense of awe, even though when we sing the songs which draw us to Him, what a friend we have in Jesus and all of the word. We can't lose the sense of awe. And so I hope that the church, in its urge to seem welcoming, doesn't cut down to size, to their size of deity. So that's one of my concerns. I would also say that an awful lot of preaching and an awful lot of music is now me-centered, how I feel about things. And that's why I'm hoping that the future would hold more use of Scripture in the service, and that will help correct the sense of why we're there. And whether the music is of one sort or another isn't the battleground. The battleground is a sense of worship and an elevation of our understanding of God's place in our life, what He intends for us. And so those would be the hopes that I would have for the denomination in the coming decades.
If you had a conference full of young people just entering the pastorate, is there general advice that you would, what would be some of the general advice that you would give them?
I would say the number one might surprise some people. I would tell young pastors, be disciplined. The pastorate, compared to a lot of jobs, allows freedom in the use of time. Doesn't mean you're not busy. It means the time is there, and except for some accountability to a board, you usually set your own schedule and what you do. And many people are not good time managers. Consequently, they waste a lot of time. And since the product is, in some cases, intangible, they wonder why things are not thriving or not growing, or their sermons are not better or better received or whatever, when it's an old-fashioned time management problem. So I'd tell young pastors, look, if the board doesn't hold you to a tight schedule, you ought to be accountable nonetheless, and you ought to bring them from time to time how you use your time and get their advice on how you use your time. This is kingdom time.
Yeah.
It does matter to God how you use your time. A second thing I would say, young pastors, particularly as churches grow, preach. Okay? Preach. I mean 42 to 46 Sundays a year. You should be preaching. You shouldn't have one visiting fireman after the next come and preach. It may give you a week off from sermon preparation, but if you catch the burden for a congregation and moving them through the Christian life, you ought to be stingy with giving up the time. Sure, you need days off and whatever, but don't give it at the expense of the continuity for your preaching by just having anybody and everybody welcome at your pulpit. They're not welcome. They should be. They should. This is God's call to you to lead a church. Consequently, I think a little bit differently. I'm from a very much more free church background, but in my older age, I've come to believe maybe the church year isn't a bad idea to get through a lot of different topics. Some pastors, because they don't give thought to the whole year, end up only touching on a small number of topics important in Christian growth and maturity. So I would say take preaching really seriously. You don't need to be the gifted orator of the world, but you do need to study for each sermon. You should be studying all the time, and the sermon should be off the top, but you should probably give 10, 12 hours of minimum focused time on the Sunday morning service and be ready for it, because God may fill your mouth sometime and make you say things better than you could say them yourself. But don't count on that. That's what discipline is for. That's what a study time is for. And your congregation should be blessed with inductive Bible study. A lot of pastors become topical, and that's okay. My own advice to young pastors is 2/3 of your sermon should be inductive Bible study. And you should go through a book study or whatever you're going to do. Help your congregation respect the Scriptures and understand them. You will grow in the process, and your congregation will grow. And they didn't come here to hear your stories about your family and all the little niceties you can fill the time and give them a pleasant time. They need to know what the Scripture says. And they're not going to get it any more directly from you than you have to give. So that means you have to be in the Scripture, studying, and preaching regularly.
If you could boil all that advice down to one gem or one practice or just one piece of wisdom, what would it be?
I don't know. It's hard to boil the things down. Sometimes it's impossible because life is many faceted. That being said, I think I would tell a young pastor, spend most of your time on the things that are most important. What happens is that people get committees and organizations and this and that gets in the way of the things that are most important. So they don't spend the most time on the things that are most important. And I include in that and emphasize, if God's given you a family, your family is part of the most important part.
What in these times and in this generation gives you the most hope and encouragement for the church?
Well, it's kind of a two-headed response. I would say with all of the technologies and all of the changing things in the human condition that the last few decades have brought, I think people have the opportunity to use a sense of urgency in getting the gospel out in very many different ways. And I see some very creative things being done by young people who are extending the reach of the gospel because of using wisely the available means that didn't exist in another generation to communicate the gospel. The other headed side of this is there has to be a sense of urgency. If the Great Commission applies today, if it's still part of the Bible, being lackadaisical about using every available means and allowing secondary things to crowd out most important things, then a question could be raised, do you really believe the Great Commission? And if you really believe the Great Commission, it doesn't mean that every pastor has to be Superman or a workaholic. But it does mean that he understands in a very special way his work matters to God, and that he's able to bless people with the need to receive the gospel. So I'm encouraged by that because I do see some signs that there are rising up young men, young women who understand that maybe the slow pace of the spread of the gospel is inadequate, and they want to do the things that will show that they do understand how urgent it is that people have a chance to respond to the full gospel message.